Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues, a retrospective series where I talk about my favorite DC comics of the past that are still affordably available today, blabbing about why they are special to me and what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Warning, this series does freely contain spoilers, but I think even spoiled, the stories I feature are still well worth reading. We've entered now into the New 52 era of DC Comics, which I had some significant complaints about, and yet in going back, I've discovered some great stories that I think are well worth reading. Batman and Robin Born to Kill is the first story arc of the New 52 Batman and Robin series, running in issues 1 through 8, and while I'd still recommend the animated movie Son of Batman over the comics story it was based on as an introduction to Bruce Wayne's newly discovered son, Damian, Born to Kill was the story that got me to appreciate what kinds of stories could be told with Damian and to value his presence in Batman comics. The DC Database synopsis for issue 1 reads, Bruce Wayne and Damian Wayne begin patrolling Gotham City together for the first time as both Batman and Robin, and father and son. Batman decides that instead of remembering his parents by honoring the anniversary of their deaths, he is instead going to honor the way they lived by celebrating their wedding anniversary, which I always had a little bit of trouble with. I like my Batman to be haunted and not well-adjusted and healed from his trauma. Anyway, continuing, they take down a group of criminals stealing from a nuclear reactor, and Damian is heavily chastised for allowing their deaths. The mysterious killer Nobody murders the Batman of Moscow in a vat of acid, announcing that he must stop Bruce Wayne and his Batman Incorporated. In the standout moment for me, Damian says, even Dick trusted me. Why can't you? Batman replies, you have to earn it. Damian says, and how long is that going to take? Batman answers, I'll let you know. This tension still connects with me as a dad who's trying to train my sons to be responsible and trustworthy. It's true that, they need to earn my trust, but at what points am I being too hard on them and not being willing to trust them when I should? And this dynamic can be found in all kinds of relationships where trust is being built. It's appropriate that we be expected to earn trust, but when we are in the position of relational power, we also have to be willing to, at some point, let go of control, give opportunity for trustworthiness to be demonstrated, and in the process, create the opportunity for trust to be violated and for us to be hurt. It's a common but complex reality of, I think, all relationships. The DC Database synopsis for issue 2 reads, realizing that Damian is a natural-born killer and he must find a way to nurture it out of him, Bruce worries that he might be as guilty of a parent as Talia. They take down a shipment of arms dealers and Damian shows restraint in their beatings. Bruce tells him that his actions are commendable, but Alfred chides Bruce on not really being supportive as a parent. The killer slits these victims' throats when they're left for the police. Meeting Bruce in person, he reveals himself to be a man named Morgan, who also shares the teachings of their mentor, Henry Ducard. The standout moment for me here is when Alfred takes issue with Bruce's use of the word commendable, suggesting instead he could have said, great job, or that he was proud of Damian. Bruce counters by pointing out that commendable is stronger praise by definition, since it means admirable and praiseworthy. Alfred responds by saying, I'm afraid it means you have a lot of work to do. This points to a really valuable principle of relational communication. Bruce was correct that the word he chose was technically superior as a form of encouragement, but he missed the fact that it was unlikely to be interpreted that way. As geeks, we can often communicate in ways that seem clear, concise, and just right to us without making an effort to understand, to ensure that our words are being received with love or in the way we intend. Doing that takes more time and effort, with often longer conversations that seek to truly understand and show value to those we're talking to. The DC Database synopsis for issue 3 reads, Bruce buys Damian a dog and tells him that he is proud of his self-control. He tries to forbid his son from leaving the manor with Morgan still on the loose, but Robin leaves after Alfred slips a tracer on him. When he finds the young vigilante delivering a particularly brutal beating to two muggers, nobody encourages his darker side. Batman arrives to intervene, but nobody knocks both of them out, and they wake up tied to a car at a secluded drive-in movie theater. It's also important to note that nobody informs Damian that Damian inadvertently left one of the thugs brain dead because of his forcefulness with him. Nobody finishes the job and kills the thug. A standout, really like a fan moment for me in this issue is when Alfred plants a tracker on Damian's motorcycle before he heads out against Bruce's wishes. Damian flicks it off and says, "Nice sleight of hand there, Alfred. Don't give up your day job." He races off without seeing the tracker Alfred put on Damian himself. Alfred quietly says to himself, "Don't worry, Damian, I won't." This both showcases Alfred's skill, a subtle reminder of his storied history in the British military, and also subtly suggests that his day job, as he sees it, involves caring for Damian with the same devotion he has given Bruce all his life. In little moments like this throughout, as Bruce is becoming a father, Alfred is becoming a sort of grandfather to Damian, and it's really beautiful for me to see. For me, an interesting thematic moment in this issue is when nobody, after observing Damian's restraint with the muggers, says to him, "By watching you these last 3 minutes, I know you're not being true to yourself." It's interesting to hear a villain playing the role of tempter in this scene using this expression. For years, it's been popular pop culture philosophy of sorts to always be true to yourself, sometimes treating this idea as a guiding virtue in life. It seems to be another way of saying do what feels natural to you. But what if, like Damian, there is something we naturally gravitate toward that is actually morally wrong? In this case, nobody wants Damian to follow his natural tendencies to kill. And so indirectly, the writer seems to be suggesting that we should guide our lives by moral principles that take priority over doing what comes naturally to us. And that's a statement that is both surprising from the entertainment world and very welcome as far as I'm concerned, since a ton of harm is done to ourselves and others around us if we make doing what feels natural our guiding star. The DC Database synopsis for issue 4 reads, "Morgan tries to convince Batman that his methods are ineffective, then decides to execute him and take Robin as an apprentice when he refuses to see reason. They are rescued by Alfred piloting the Batplane using remote control. Back in the cave, Bruce reveals that Morgan is Henry Ducard's son. They argue, and Damian insists that he can't listen to his father if he's constantly keeping secrets from him. Taking the dog for a walk to get out, he decides to name it Titus. Once again, nobody appears and tries to convince Robin to join him." This issue is more dialogue heavy, but a key moment in all of it seems to be when Alfred points out to Bruce that despite appearances, Damian is actually very afraid, since for the first time he has seen his father in a beaten state of weakness. And so when nobody shows up to continue tempting Damian to the dark side, readers see how real the temptation might actually be as Damian is in search of security. The DC Database synopsis for issue 5 reads, "Robin decides to leave Wayne Manor and become Nobody's student, who insists that he still needs to prove his newfound will. Batman attempts to track them down and makes a recording for his son to explain the history between himself and Nobody. He tells the story of how they first met when he sought out Henry Ducard's instruction. Robin and Nobody hunt down a foreign ambassador involved with human trafficking. Then Morgan puts a gun in Damian's hand and tells him to perform the execution." This issue features a significant turn for Batman. He realizes he has effectively lost Damian and so begins recording a humble confession for his son. It's the start of the kind of humble moment we all ought to be willing to have, even when dealing with those we have authority over. The DC database synopsis for issue 6 reads, Robin pulls the trigger, but the gun is empty. Having passed his test, nobody takes him back to his lair where they can interrogate the ambassador. Bruce continues to explain the history between Morgan and himself on the tape. During their time together with Henry Ducard, Bruce was an unwitting accomplice to murder and tried to leave their arrangement. Henry had Morgan attempt to murder him and tie up the loose end, leading Bruce to nearly break his one rule, killing Morgan in retaliation. Back in the present, Robin reveals that he had been lying to nobody and knew there were no bullets in the gun by its weight. Despite their problems, Batman is still his father, and he won't let a crazed, sadistic murderer come between that. Morgan announces over the radio that he is going to break Damian and force Bruce to listen to every sound. For me, the most memorable and dramatic moment of this entire storyline happens when nobody asks Damian why he would betray him. The problems between Damian and Bruce are real. Nobody was setting Damian free of Bruce's frustrating restrictions and expectations. So why did Damian side with Bruce? Damian's answer as tears stream down his face is simple and impactful. Because he's my father, you idiot. For me, it's the climax of the whole story. I mean, sure, Damian is, after this point, in horrible trouble that needs to be resolved, but the main tension of the story hangs on whether or not Damian and Bruce can reconcile amidst such dysfunction. And here Damian basically, I think, reveals that even if they can't reconcile, even if this conflict between them continues, he, in his own way, loves his dad and always will. And as both a father and a son, that's really powerful to me. The DC database synopsis for issue 7 reads, Batman tears through the city streets, exploding the Batmobile through the wall of nobody's hideout. They battle, and Bruce delivers an even more severe beating to Morgan. Having almost killed him, he insists that they're going to leave him for the police. Nobody swears that he'll come back to kill all their friends, and tells Damian to make the right decision. Damian murders him on the spot. This issue is really the action climax as Batman and Nobody duke it out. And like the best action stories, I think, the action is tied to drama. As Bruce and Morgan fight seemingly to the death, they do so out of very personal rage. Morgan blames Bruce for the way Morgan's father rejected him after Bruce bested him in combat. And Bruce, of course, nearly kills Morgan because he tortured Damian while Bruce was listening and committed in no uncertain terms to kill Damian while Bruce watched. And yet there is still a shocking dramatic twist left in the story. Just as Damian and Bruce's relationship seems headed in a better direction, with Damian's loyalty to Bruce confirmed and Bruce developing more trust in Damian, or at least starting to, that trust is shattered when Damian shockingly and instantly kills Morgan, leaving us with an intense, dramatic cliffhanger, not based on whether or not Bruce and Damian will survive, but on whether or not their relationship will. And finally, the DC database synopsis for issue 8 reads, Bruce takes Damian home where Alfred sees to both of their wounds and has them hospitalized for 2 weeks. Instead of getting angry, Bruce tells Damian that he understands his problems and actually struggles with the decision of whether or not to kill every day. His principle is that you can't build a better world by perpetuating the cycle of violence and death. You have to stand above that. Damian says that he doesn't want to be like Nobody, he wants to be like his father, but it's difficult. They reach an understanding and spend the rest of the day in Alfred's care, playing with the dog in the backyard. They play into the evening together, and the bat signal turns on, causing both of them to run off again while Alfred sighs and questions if one simple night is too much to ask. Now, from a practical standpoint, I had to stop and ask myself how Batman could essentially deny Morgan justice for his murder at the hands of Damian. I mean, sure, Damian is 10, but the normal consequences would still be something like juvenile hall or extensive psychiatric treatment. Damian would not simply go free. But in the context of this arguably fantastical and certainly fictional setting, Damian is not going free. Bruce probably reasons, as he always has up to this point, that Damien has the best chance of rehabilitation while under the watchful eye of Bruce. He certainly couldn't be held by any correctional and psychiatric facility and would probably just end up hurting or even killing more people. The best chance for his rehabilitation and for the safety of others is for him to continue living and working with Bruce. I think from a dramatic and moral standpoint, there is enough moral complexity here to keep most readers from utterly rejecting Damien at this point. Although not as clear a choice as the one Superman had to make when executing General Zod, Morgan was a multiple serial murderer, tried to kill Damien, and had every intention of killing Bruce, Damien, and everyone dear to them, as well as arguably the ability to make good on those threats. Now, this doesn't excuse Damien's actions. In fact, the writing doesn't excuse him either. When Damien asks Bruce how to make amends, Bruce says that he can't, which, as a side note, I appreciate in contrast to the more popular story beat in which villains quote-unquote redeem themselves by sacrificing their lives. So Damien can't make up for what he's done. It's horribly wrong, and the story acknowledges that. But at the same time, I think the complexity of the situation makes Damien somewhat relatable when we try to put ourselves in his shoes. Once again, the most memorable moment for me in this issue is a very personal and relational one. As Damien wrestles with his killing nature, he says, "Sometimes I don't know what I am or even who I am." Bruce doesn't give him false assurances of his own goodness or condemn him for the evil inside him, but simply affirms his value by saying, "You're my son. All I want is for you to be the best Damian Wayne you can be." This powerfully resonates with me, not just as a dad, but as a Christian. Even as I continue to daily fail and fall into sin, doing the same things again and again, I am God's adopted child. And if you've trusted in Jesus for forgiveness, then you are too. The sin and evil we give into on a regular basis doesn't ever change that or reduce the value we have to God. He deals with our sin, first by providing payment for it in Christ, then in leading us and empowering us to be the best versions of ourselves we can be, at least in this life, and eventually he deals with it by removing the very tendency towards sin from us in our future resurrected bodies. I find Batman and Robin Born to Kill to be an essential story because it justifies the decision, in my mind, to give Batman a biological son by creating drama that is virtually unique to the relationships between parents and children. It's a story that's ultimately about the love between a father and son, despite recurring conflict that defines their relationship. And even the best parent-child relationships have some degree of conflict along the way, which makes this a story that I find relatable, intense, moving, and even valuable. Now, although you can buy the Batman and Robin Born to Kill trade paperback on Amazon, I would advise against it, as that version seems to mysteriously only contain issues 1 through 6. But you can get the entire story on DC Universe Infinite, and I highly recommend giving it a read for yourself. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.